For 20 years, a construction company backed their trucks onto a black man's land in South Georgia and dumped their scrap where his father used to run cattle. He never once called the sheriff. He wrote down every load, every date, every ton, in a composition book he bought for $1.19. Then he handed them a bill for $4,476,720, and it was legal. They were wrong about him. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The first truck came on a Tuesday in March of 2005 at 20 past 4 in the afternoon. Isaiah Moss was 24 then, up a ladder on the north side of his mother's house with a chisel in his hand, cutting out rotted fascia. The wood smelled like wet paper. He heard the air brakes before he saw anything. Out past the fence line, down the old cattle road into the pines, a tandem dump truck was backing through the gap where the gate used to hang. White, with a green stripe. On the door it said Calloway Building and Supply, Cadell County, since 1961. Isaiah came down off the ladder and walked out through wet grass in his work boots. By the time he reached the tree line, the bed was up and the load was going, and he could still describe that sound 20 years later. Lumber falling on lumber. A long, clattering roar, then a hiss. Broken 2x4s with the nails still in them. Torn plywood. Snapped joists, block, chunks of concrete with rebar coming out like whiskers. A window frame with the glass gone. It came off in a wave and settled into a pile the size of a car, 60 feet inside his mother's fence. The air went white with dust and smelled like sawn pine and old mortar. The driver dropped the bed and started to pull forward. "Hey," Isaiah said. The man leaned out the window, maybe 50, sunburned to the collar, with the face of somebody who had been told where to go and had gone there. "Afternoon." "You know this is private land." "I know it's Moss land," the driver said. "That's what I was told. I was told it was cleared." "Cleared by who?" The driver looked at his mirror and back. Something crossed his face, and it was not meanness. It was the discomfort of a man who has figured out he is standing in the middle of something. "You'd have to ask my boss," he said. Then he pulled out through the gap, and the truck went up the county road with its empty bed rattling. Isaiah Moss stood in his mother's back 40 and looked at a pile of somebody else's garbage on ground his family had held since 1892. That is where this starts. Not with anger, with a question. The land was 140 acres in the flat country between Cadell and the Ochlockonee. It came down through a man named Ezekiel Moss, who was born to people who were owned and died holding a deed. A house, a barn with a fallen roof, a pond, and a back 40 of cut-over pine nobody had touched since Isaiah's grandfather sold the cattle in 1978. His mother, Ruthie, was 59 and lived there alone. Isaiah lived 11 miles off in a rented place in town. He had a daughter not born yet and a wife who would leave in 2018. He made his living doing restoration carpentry on the old houses in the historic blocks of Cadell, for a man named Purvis who paid cash, taught him everything, and never put him on the books. He drove out 4 evenings a week to work on the house. That night, he sat at his mother's kitchen table and asked her what she knew. Ruthie Moss put a glass of tea in front of him and sat down across from him and told him about Lamar. Lamar Moss was Isaiah's second cousin, 41, living in Valdosta. He was one of 14 people whose names were on that land. Not 14 people who owned pieces of it, 14 who owned all of it, together, undivided. the way land comes down through a family that never had a will. Somebody at Calloway had pulled the courthouse records and understood that 14 names meant 14 doors to knock on. Lamar Moss had a lien on a boat and had not set foot on that property in his adult life. He signed a one-page letter for $100 a month, giving Calloway Building and Supply permission to deposit clean construction debris on the rear portion. $100 a month. He came by in January, Ruthie said. Asked me how I was. Didn't say a word about any letter. Isaiah sat with that. Outside the window, the pines went black against the last of the light, and a whippoorwill started up. Somewhere, back in there, sat a pile of broken lumber the size of a car, and every hour of it was legal because of one signature from a man in Valdosta with a boat payment. I'll take care of it, he said. Isaiah, I will. His mother reached over and put her hand flat on the table next to his, not on it. Your daddy tried, she said. Nathaniel Moss had been dead 6 years. He worked 34 years at a fertilizer plant outside Thomasville and spent his weekends on that property fixing things that did not need fixing. Isaiah had followed him with a bucket of tools since he was 5. What Ruthie went and got out of the bedroom closet was a composition book. Black and white marbled cover, the kind that costs $1.19 at any drugstore, soft at the corners, and it smelled like closet. Inside the front cover, in his father's pencil hand, small and square and slanted right, it said, Moss Property, and a date in 1994. There were 3 pages of entries. Nathaniel Moss had been writing down every time the county mowed the right-of-way and cut his fence. Dates, times, what was cut, and what it cost. 3 pages of it in pencil, ending in the spring of 1999, 6 weeks before he died, on an entry about a culvert. Isaiah read all 3 pages standing at the kitchen counter. Then he asked his mother for a pencil. He turned to the 4th page, the first blank one, and he wrote the date and the time, 4:20 in the afternoon, and the words, 1 tandem dump, Calloway Building and Supply, mixed dimensional lumber and concrete. And then he stopped, because he did not know how much. He went out to the truck and got a tape measure. It was full dark. He walked back with a flashlight and measured the pile 3 ways, length and width and average height. The mosquitoes found him inside a minute. He wrote the numbers down, and under them his estimate, 11 tons. He was off. 1.5 tons low, he learned later, and that is the number he stayed proudest of, because a man guessing in the dark with a tape measure is not supposed to land within 15%. That was the first entry. There would be 9,411 more. The county commission met the second Monday of the month at 6 p.m. in a room with brown carpet and a drop ceiling and 11 folding chairs for the public. Isaiah put on a clean shirt and went in April. Public comment, 3 minutes. He stood when they called his name and said a company was depositing construction debris on family land in the Northeast District, that the man who authorized it had no possession and did not live in the county, that his mother slept 70 feet from it, and that he was asking the commission whether it was a permitted activity. 1 minute and 50 seconds. He had practiced in the truck. Roy Dean Calloway was sitting in the second row. He was 66. He had built about 1/3 of everything that went up in Cadell County since 1971. He sat on the hospital authority and the bank's local board, and had paid for the lights at the high school field. He was not a monster, and people get that wrong when they tell this. He had been the biggest man in a small county so long that he could no longer tell the difference between what he was allowed to do and what nobody had ever stopped him from doing. He did not wait to be recognized. He just talked from his chair. "Mr. Chairman, if I can save everybody some time," the chairman said. "Go ahead, Roy Dean." "We got a written license from an owner of record. My lawyers got it. It's clean debris. It's wood. It's inert. And half of it came off jobs in this county that put food on tables in this room." He turned in his chair and looked at Isaiah Moss, standing there in a clean shirt with 3 pages of notes he would not get to use. Then he said it. "Son, that back 40 of y'all's has been a dump since before you were born. You can't dump on a dump." Somebody in the back of the room laughed. It was not a cruel laugh. It was worse. It was the easy, comfortable laugh of people who had heard a familiar man say a familiar thing. And it went around that little room and landed on the only black man standing up in it. Isaiah Moss did not raise his voice. He did not tell them his great-great-grandfather bought that ground in 1892 out of a sawmill wage. He did not say his father ran 70 head of cattle on the back 40 and had a photograph of it. He did not mention that the pile was 5 weeks old. He said thank you for the time, and he sat down, and the commission moved to the next item, which was a variance on a sign. He was in the parking lot 10 minutes later when Roy Dean Calloway came out with 2 other men. Calloway walked over. That is the part Isaiah did not expect. "No hard feelings," Calloway said. He put his hand out. "Business is business." Isaiah looked at the hand for a second. Then he shook it, because his mother had raised him and because a man does not learn anything with his back turned. "Mr. Calloway," he said, "how many loads a week are you planning on?" Calloway laughed and said he liked a man who came right at it. Then he gave the number without thinking, the way you tell somebody the time. 3, 4, depends on the work." "Thank you," Isaiah said. He drove home and wrote that down too. Not an estimate, the words. 3, 4, depends on the work, said in the parking lot of the county administration building, with the date and the names of the 2 men standing there. He did not know yet what it would be worth. He knew what it was: an admission of volume from the owner with witnesses. His mother had gone to bed by the time he got back. Isaiah sat at the kitchen table under the one bulb with the composition book open and the pencil in his hand. Out past the barn, back where the cattle road ran into the pines, the pile sat in the dark, getting bigger. He turned to a clean page in the back and wrote a heading: Things to Learn. The list had 4 items on it that first night. Who owns this land? What is a license? What are they dumping? What is it worth? It took 11 months to answer the first one, and that answer is why this took 20 years instead of 2. The clerk of Superior Court was in the courthouse basement, a cold room that smelled of paper and floor stripper. It was run by a woman named Wanda Pettigrew, there since 1984. Isaiah came in on a Saturday in May and asked how a person looks up who owns a piece of property. Wanda Pettigrew looked at him over her glasses. "You got a parcel number?" "I got a road and a family name." "Then we'll be here a while," she said, and got up. That was the start of an 11-year working relationship neither would have called that. Wanda showed him the grantor and grantee books, how a deed reads, and what it means when a chain of title stops. The Moss chain stopped in 1951. Ezekiel Moss bought the 140 in 1892. It passed to his son and to his son. In 1951, Isaiah's great-grandmother, Cora, died without a will, in a county that did not encourage black families to write them. After that, nothing. No estate, no probate, no division. What happens then has taken more land from black families in the American South than any single act of violence. and almost nobody outside it has heard the term. It is called heir property. When a person dies without a will, the land goes to all the heirs at once, not in pieces. Every heir owns an undivided fractional interest in the whole property. Then those heirs die, and their children inherit fractions of fractions. After 3 generations, a single farm can have 60 owners in 6 states, most of whom have never seen it. By 2005, the Moss place had 14 owners of record. Ruthie Moss was one of them, by marriage into a 1/14. 31 years on that land, taxes paid out of a widow's income, mowing around the barn every April. In the eyes of the law, that made her a co-tenant, not the owner. And here is the part that took Isaiah 11 months to understand and a lifetime to stop being angry about. Any co-tenant may use the whole property. Any co-tenant may license another party to use it. One owner out of 14, holding an interest in ground he had never walked, could sign a letter letting a construction company dump on the back 40. That letter bound every other owner, not a loophole. That is the law of co-tenancy, and it runs the same way in most of this country. There was no trespass. There could not be, because the trucks had permission from an owner. Isaiah learned that in a basement in July, with a legal treatise open on a table Wanda Pettigrew had cleared for him. He sat a long time after he finished the paragraph. He went to 3 lawyers over the next 2 years. The first was in Cadell and would not take it. He explained the co-tenancy rule in 9 minutes, faster than the treatise, then said the honest part. Roy Dean Calloway's company was the 2nd largest employer in the county, and there was no cause of action worth the trouble. The second was in Thomasville. He wanted $3,000 to write a demand letter he said would not work. The third was in Albany. She listened to the whole thing without interrupting, then asked one question. How many of the 14 would sell you their interest? I don't know. I've never asked. Then that's your case, she said. There isn't a lawsuit in here. There's a shopping list. She would not take him either. She charged nothing for the hour and told him to go home and find out what each of those 14 people wanted. You cannot revoke a license you have no right to revoke. The only way to get that right is to become the whole of the ownership. Isaiah drove home from Albany that night with the radio off. A 1/14 interest in cutover pine in a poor county was worth maybe $4,000 on a generous day. 14 of those, plus title work, plus finding people who had moved 3 times, plus the 2 who were dead and had heirs of their own. $60,000 maybe $80, over years. He was making $31,000 a year in cash from Purvis. He started anyway. And while he started, the trucks kept coming. Here's what nobody understood about Isaiah Moss for the next 15 years, including most of his own family. He was not waiting. Waiting is only what it looked like from the road. He was accumulating. The ledger became a system that fall. He built it the way his father built a jig, which is to say, he built it once and then used it 10,000 times without changing it. Every entry got 7 things: date, time, truck number off the door or the tailgate, company, material description, estimated tonnage, weather. People asked about the weather later. Wet lumber weighs more, and he wanted his estimate honest. He kept a folding chair on the back porch and binoculars on the windowsill. Ruthie started calling out when she heard the brakes. After a while, she wrote them down herself when he was not there, in her own hand. which is why about 1,100 of those entries are in a 70-year-old woman's cursive. And starting in 2008, he did the thing that turned a grievance into a business. He started sorting. The first time was not strategy. It was a joist. He was walking the pile in February and saw end grain on a broken floor joist sticking out. He stopped, pulled it free, and knocked the dirt off. Longleaf heart pine, 32 growth rings to the inch. You do not get that from a tree grown in the last 100 years. That board came out of a building torn down that week in Cadell, and the tree had been standing when Ezekiel Moss was alive. Isaiah carried it to the barn, set it on 2 sawhorses, and looked at it a while. Then he went back and went through the whole pile. What he found in that pile, and in every pile after it, is the reason this story ends the way it does. Calloway Building and Supply was a demolition contractor as much as a builder. When they took down a farmhouse or a warehouse or a mercantile building on the square, everything in it came out in a truck. Heart pine joists and flooring, quarter sawn white oak, old-growth cypress out of a barn in Grady County, mantels, newel posts, doors with the original hardware. They were throwing away the inside of the 19th century and paying a man $100 a month to do it on his family's land. But there was the other half. Because he walked those piles with a light and a pry bar, he also found what does not belong in a clean debris fill. Painted trim off houses built before 1978, which means lead. Asphalt shingles. Sheets of board with a fibrous edge he learned to recognize and stopped touching barehanded. Sealed buckets, batteries, fluorescent tubes. Once, a 55-gallon drum with a residue he never identified. Clean construction debris is one thing under Georgia law. That is another. So Isaiah Moss began to keep 2 piles instead of 1, and then 3, and the 3 piles are the empire. Pile 1 was salvage, good wood stacked and stickered under a pole shed he built out of their own scrap, sorted by species and thickness, drying. Pile 2 was true inert fill, broken block, concrete, brick, clean pine with no finish on it. He graded that out and used it, and by 2014, the road to the barn had a base that would hold a loaded truck in April. Pile 3 he put a fence around. Pile 3 was every painted board, every suspect sheet, every sealed container and battery and tube, segregated by hand, tarped, logged by date, received, with a photograph. He did not move it. He did not bury it. He did not haul it off, because hauling it off would have made it his. He left it exactly where Calloway put it, and he wrote down what it was. Ruthie asked him once why he did not just get rid of the bad stuff. It was 2012, and she was standing at the fence looking at it. Because it isn't mine, Isaiah said. It's on our land. It's on our land, he agreed. It came off their jobs. There's a photograph of every load and a date on every photograph. His mother looked at the tarps a while. Isaiah, she said, how long are you going to do this? He thought about it. The honest answer was that he did not know, and he did not say the number out loud because the number would have frightened her. Until it's worth something, he said. Cody Pruitt drove for Calloway from 2009 to the end of it. He was the second driver after the first retired, and for years he came 3 and 4 times a week. White, from a family out toward the county line with about as much as the Mosses had. He was the only man at Calloway who ever said anything about it out loud. He said it the first year, leaning out his window with the bed still up. You know this ain't right. I know, Isaiah said. Then how come you ain't hollerin'? Isaiah stood there with the composition book against his forearm and a pencil behind his ear. He wrote the truck number down before he answered, because the number was what mattered and he had learned not to lose it. "Hollering's free," he said. "That's the problem with it." Cody Pruitt laughed once and shook his head and drove out. 15 years later, that man would stand in front of a hearing officer and end his own career in about 90 seconds. Amara Moss was born in 2017, in March, at the hospital in Thomasville, 7 pounds, 4 ounces. Her mother left the next year for Jacksonville. There is not much to say about it beyond that it happened, that she calls it Christmas, and that Isaiah has never said a word against her in the child's hearing. So it was Isaiah and Ruthie and a baby in the house on the 140. He moved back in 2019 into the house he had been repairing for 14 years, his old room, a crib in the corner. That is also the year he left Purvis and started working for himself, and the reason he could is the wood. Here is how a man turns somebody else's garbage into a trade. In 2010, Isaiah drove 4 hours to a hardwood conference in Macon because there was a 2-day session in the program on lumber grading. He paid $90 he did not have and sat in the back of a hotel meeting room with a spiral notebook. The man teaching it was a retired grader named Hoyt Ammons. 62, from Alabama, 31 years inspecting hardwood for a lumber association. He taught the way a man teaches who has decided the knowledge should not die with him. Isaiah asked 11 questions in 2 days. Nobody else asked 4. At the end of it, Ammons found him in the parking lot. "You're not in the business," he said. "Not yet." "What have you got?" Isaiah told him. Not the whole story, just the technical part, which is that he had access to a continuous supply of reclaimed structural timber out of pre-1940 demolition, and no idea what any of it was worth. Hoyt Ammons looked at him for a second. "Son, that's not access," he said. "That's a mine." They wrote to each other for 12 years. Ammons taught him grading by mail and telephone, the way people used to learn things. Isaiah sent photographs of end grain. Ammons sent back what he was looking at and what to check next. In 2013, Isaiah sat for the certification and passed it. There is a card in his wallet that says he is a certified grader of hardwood lumber. He is one of 2 in that part of Georgia. The other one works for a mill. What the card does is turn an opinion into a number. Anybody can drag a board out of a pile and say it looks like heart pine. A certified grader puts a species and a grade on a stack and writes a tally, and that tally is a document architects, builders, and insurance companies pay against. Isaiah started selling in 2014. Not much at first. A restoration outfit in Savannah bought 400 board feet of heart pine flooring for a house on Jones Street and paid $9 a board foot. And that check was $3,600 for wood that had been thrown at him for free. That is the second half of the arithmetic, and it took 11 years. 14 owners of record from Valdosta to Detroit to Oakland. Some dead with heirs of their own. None expecting a call about 140 acres in a county they had never seen. Isaiah tracked down every one of them. He did it with the same discipline he used on the piles. A page for each name, last known address, phone, who knew them, what they remembered, what they wanted. Wanda Pettigrew showed him how to trace the dead ones through the probate index. An aunt in Oakland thought he was running a scam and hung up twice. It took a letter from Ruthie in her own hand with a photograph of the barn in it before that one closed. A branch in Jacksonville had 4 heirs and 3 opinions. Every deed got recorded. filed at the courthouse with the date stamp, and Wanda ran the copies at 50 cents a page and once let it slide when he was $11 short. He bought the first interest in 2012. He bought the last one in 2023. 11 years. $91,400. All of it out of wood that Calloway Building and Supply delivered to him for nothing, and paid a man in Valdosta $100 a month to keep delivering. They financed the acquisition of the ground they were dumping on. Nobody at that company ever understood that, not even at the end. And through all of it, the thing that made it possible to endure was not patience. People said patient later in the newspaper, and Isaiah never liked the word. It was work. There is a difference. Amara learned to walk in the barn aisle between stacks of drying oak. She learned her colors off paint cans on a shelf. By 4, she could tell heart pine from yellow pine at 10 feet because her father held up 2 offcuts and asked which one was older, and she was right 80% of the time. She called the ledger the counting book. There is a photograph from 2022 of Amara Moss at 5 years old, sitting on the back porch step in her grandmother's lap with a pencil in her fist, and the composition book open on her knees, and she is scribbling in the margin next to an entry her father made about a Wednesday load. That is the picture that ran in the Atlanta paper 3 years later. They cropped it. Now, the other side of that fence. Roy Dean Calloway did not think about the Moss place from one year to the next. That is the honest truth of it, and it is the thing that makes this story what it is instead of a story about hatred. The dumping was a line item. Somebody in his office wrote a $100 check every month to Lamar Moss, and the trucks went where the dispatcher told them, and the money it saved was real. Because here is what a tipping fee is. A permitted construction and demolition landfill in that part of Georgia charged between $38 and $52 a ton over those years. A tandem running 14 tons pays about $600 to unload. 3 or 4 times a week runs between $90,000 and $130,000 a year. 20 years of that is real money in a county that size. And the second thing, which is the thing that ended them, is that a permitted landfill weighs your load and looks at it. If a driver shows up with painted trim off a 1920s house or a pallet of suspect board, there's an inspection, a rejection, and a manifest. The back 40 had no scale and no inspector. So over 2 decades, everything Calloway Building and Supply did not want documented went to the same place, and a man with a pencil documented all of it. Grant Calloway came into the business in 2016. Roy Dean's son, 34, back from a construction management degree at a state school. He was worse than his father in the way a second generation often is. Roy Dean had built things with his hands before he built a company. Grant had run spreadsheets. He looked at the tipping fee line and saw a savings he had inherited, and he doubled the volume. By 2019, it was 6 and 8 loads a week. By 2021, Isaiah was logging 900 loads a year, and the piles behind the tree line had stopped being piles. They were terrain. Grant Calloway also did something his father never bothered to do. He came out to look at it. That was August of 2021. He drove a company pickup back down the cattle road at about 4 in the afternoon and got out with his phone in his hand and stood there looking at the property. What he saw should have stopped him cold. He stood in front of a pole shed holding 80,000 board feet of stickered, sorted, graded, reclaimed timber, in a yard with a built road, 4 photo positions marked in rebar, and a fenced and tarped area with a hand-lettered sign that said, "Segregated, regulated, fraction. Do not disturb." Isaiah walked up from the barn, wiping his hands on a shopcloth. Grant Calloway looked at him and did not recognize what he was looking at. "You Moss?" "Isaiah Moss." "You've got a nice little operation going," Grant said, and he meant it as an insult, and it came out as one. "Making yourself some firewood money off our leavings." "Something like that." Grant nodded at the fenced area with the tarps. "What's all that?" "That's the material your crews brought me that isn't supposed to go in a clean fill," Isaiah said. "Painted stock, some board I don't like the look of, sealed containers. It's separated by load date. There's a photograph of every one." Grant Calloway laughed at him. That is not a figure of speech. He stood in the yard and laughed. And then he said the line that Camille Odom would read out loud at a hearing 4 years later while a state officer wrote it down. "Man, nobody is ever going to read your little book." Isaiah did not answer that. He stood there with a shopcloth in his hand and let it go by, and then he asked a question in a flat voice. And Grant Calloway answered it without thinking, the same way his father had answered one in a parking lot 16 years before. "Y'all still hauling out of the Whitmore Street teardown?" "Through October," Grant said. "Why?" "Just keeping count," Isaiah said. Grant Calloway got back in his truck and drove out, and he told 2 people at the office that evening that the Moss place was fine and that the old man was making birdhouses out there. Isaiah went inside and wrote it down, the date, the time, the pickup, and the words. "Nobody is ever going to read your little book." He wrote it in quotation marks, which he almost never did, and he wrote the 2 words that made it evidence instead of a memory. Statement by owner. So far, this is a story about a man writing in a notebook while a company dumps on his mother's land. 18 years of it, a pencil against a fleet of trucks. Here is the part that nobody in Cadell County saw coming, and it had been sitting behind a tree line the whole time. Fly over that property in 2023, and you would not see a dump. You would see a working yard. The cattle road had a crushed concrete base under it, 11 feet wide, crowned to shed water, built out of material that arrived free on somebody else's truck. 400 yards back to a turnaround with room for a tandem to swing. On the left, the pole shed, built in 2015 out of reclaimed 6x6 posts and salvaged tin, 90 feet long, open on the south side. Under it, stacked on runners and stickered so the air moves, 411,000 board feet of graded reclaimed lumber. Longleaf heart pine mostly, some of it 30 and 40 rings to the inch. Quarter-sawn white oak out of a courthouse annex in the next county. Cypress. 280 feet of poplar crown molding off a house on the square, built in 1888, taken down in 2019 for a bank drive-through. And on the east side, inside a fence he had put up himself, on ground he had covered with heavy plastic sheeting in 2016, was the other thing. 940 tons of segregated, regulated material. Painted lumber, tarped and stacked by year. Suspect board in wrapped bundles. Sealed drums on pallets. Batteries in a bin. Fluorescent tubes in a rack he built for them, because a broken tube is a mercury release. There was a sign on the gate, hand-lettered, repainted every few years. Segregated, regulated fraction. Do not disturb. Deposited by Calloway Building and Supply. And in the barn, on a shelf Isaiah built for them in 2018, were the ledgers. 20 composition books, black and white marbled covers, numbered on the spine in marker, 1 through 20. Volume 1 has 3 pages of a dead man's pencil handwriting at the front of it. 9,412 entries. Every load, 18 years. Date, time, truck number, company, material, tonnage, weather. Cross-referenced to 2,216 photographs from 4 fixed camera positions. That is the money shot, not the pile, the system. A man in a poor county had spent 18 years turning an insult into an asset, and the people who made it drove past the end of that road 4 to 8 times a week and never walked back to see what was happening to their garbage. Now, what was it worth? Isaiah ran the number for the first time in the winter of 2022 at the kitchen table with a calculator and volumes 1 through 19. 9,412 loads. Average 2.14 tons, calibrated against 14 real weight tickets he had gotten from the dirt contractor. 20,140 tons. At the going tipping rate in that region, call it $48 a ton, that is $966,720 of disposal that Calloway Building and Supply had not paid for. Then the second number, which is the one that broke it open. 940 tons of it was not clean debris. It was regulated. Characterization, testing, manifesting, licensed transport and disposal at a permitted facility runs $3,000 to $4,000 a ton for those categories. Isaiah wrote $3.2 million on a piece of paper and sat back in a kitchen chair in a house his great-great-grandfather's land was under. Here is the wall he had stood in front of for 18 years. They had a license. Lamar Moss's one-page letter from 2005. While that license lived, every ton was authorized, and authorized material is not a debt. It is a gift. He had bought 13 of the 14 interests by then. The last one was Lamar's. Lamar Moss died in 2021 of a heart attack at 57 in a parking lot in Valdosta. His interest passed to his widow, a woman named Deborah, who had never been to Cadell County in her life. Isaiah drove down there in February of 2023. He could have sent a lawyer. By then he could have afforded one. Instead, he drove an hour and 40 minutes and knocked on a door and stood on a porch in the cold with his hat in his hand, because the woman had buried a husband and was family by marriage, and there is a way you do things. Deborah Moss made him coffee. They sat in her front room for 2 hours. She asked about Ruthie. She asked about the child. Then she asked what the land was worth, and Isaiah told her the truth, which is that the interest was worth about $6,000 on the market, and that he would pay her $9,000. Why $9,000? Because your husband was paid $100 a month for 18 years, Isaiah said. That's $21,600. I'm not asking you for it back, but I'm not going to pretend I don't know it. Deborah Moss looked at her hands. He never told me where that money came from, she said. No, ma'am, I don't expect he did. She was quiet a while. Then she asked the question that people ask when they have understood something. Is it bad? What's back there? Some of it's bad, Isaiah said. Most of it's just wood. She sold him the interest for the $9,000, and she signed at a bank in Valdosta on the 4th of March, 2023, with a notary named Betts. Isaiah drove that deed to the courthouse in Cadell the same afternoon and stood at Wanda Pettigrew's counter while she stamped it. Wanda looked at the stamp. Then she looked at the file she had been keeping in her own head for 11 years. That's the last one, she said. That's the last one. Wanda Pettigrew was 68 and 11 months from retirement. She sat down behind the counter and did not say anything for a second. "Your daddy came in here in '97, she said, asking about this same thing. I didn't know what to tell him." Isaiah did not know that. His father had never said it. What did he ask? "He asked how you get a family's name back on one line," Wanda said. "I told him I didn't know if you could." She stamped the receipt and slid it across. "Turns out you can," she said. "Takes about 30 years. That was the 4th of March, 2023. On that afternoon, for the first time since 1951, 140 acres in Cadell County, Georgia, had exactly one owner of record, and his name was Isaiah Nathaniel Moss, which meant the license was now revocable by him alone. He did not revoke it that week. That is the part people argue about, and it is the moral gray zone in the middle of this story, and it deserves to be said plainly instead of hidden. He waited 5 weeks. Then he did something better than revoking it. He revoked it in a way that started a meter. The letter went out by certified mail on the 11th of April, 2023, to Calloway Building and Supply, attention, Roy Dean Calloway, and Grant Calloway. Return receipt requested. Green card came back signed by an office manager on the 14th. It was 1 page. Isaiah wrote it himself and then paid a lawyer $400 to check it. It said the undersigned was now sole owner in fee simple, that all prior licenses granted by any former co-tenant, including the license of 2005, were revoked on receipt, and that no further deposit was authorized. Then it said the sentence that changed the arithmetic. Should deliveries continue after receipt of this notice, they will be accepted only under the fee schedule of Moss recovered materials, filed with the county at $48 per ton and invoiced monthly. Nobody at Calloway read the second paragraph. The receptionist stamped it. Somebody filed it. Grant Calloway was told there was a letter from the Moss place about the dumping, and he said one sentence that his own lawyer would later call the most expensive thing anybody at that company ever said. "Tell them we've got a license." The trucks came back on the 17th of April. Isaiah was on the back porch when the first one turned in. He watched it back down the road he had built and lift the bed and dump 14 tons of somebody else's demolition on ground that now had one name on it and a filed rate. He wrote the entry in volume 20. Then he opened a new page at the back, and he wrote a new heading in the same square slanted hand his father had used on page 1. Account. Calloway Building and Supply. The statements went out on the first business day of every month. Isaiah bought a box of window envelopes and a book of stamps and set up a form on a used laptop, and on the 1st of May, 2023, he mailed the first one. Moss Recovered Materials, Statement of Account. It listed every load received the prior month by date and truck number, the tonnage, the rate of $48 per ton, the line total, and the balance. At the bottom, the same paragraph every time. Deliveries were not authorized. The sender was asked to cease. Any material delivered would be invoiced at the filed rate. First statement, April of 2023. 19 loads, 40.6 tons, $1,948.80. Nobody at Calloway paid it. Nobody at Calloway answered it. Somebody in that office started dropping the statements into a folder. It sat in a drawer 5 years and grew to 211 pages, and every page said, "Cease deliveries," or "Remit at the filed rate." That folder is the case, not the ledger. the folder full of unanswered statements sitting in their own filing cabinet. Here is the legal thing, and it is old, and it is boring, and it is the reason a man in a small county beat a company with a lawyer on retainer. It is called an account stated. When one party sends a statement of account and the receiver keeps it without objecting in a reasonable time and goes on taking the goods or services, the law in most states treats the silence as agreement to the amount. It is not a contract anybody signed. It is one they made by shutting up and continuing to accept delivery. Camille Odom would explain it to a hearing officer in one sentence. They were not sent bills for something they refused. They were sent bills for something they kept doing. That is the entire mechanism, and it took Isaiah Moss 2005 to 2023 to be in a position to use it. The permit came in June. He filed with the county for a construction and demolition recovered materials facility on the back 40. 2 years preparing it, 111 pages. A fee schedule filed with a public body is not a number a man made up in his kitchen. Planning staff kicked it back twice on technicalities. The second time, it came with a handwritten note about buffer distance that Isaiah learned, 3 years later, had been written by somebody in code enforcement rather than planning. $48 per ton for mixed construction and demolition debris, filed public and posted on a sign at the road. He put it at the entrance where a truck could not miss it, 4 feet by 6, on 2 posts of his own heart pine. Moss recovered materials, C and D debris, $48 per ton, all loads weighed and invoiced, no unauthorization dumping. Cody Pruitt read that sign on the 22nd of June and got on the radio to the dispatcher and asked whether they had an account there now. The dispatcher told him to dump the load. He dumped the load. He also, that evening, took a photograph of the sign on his own phone, and he kept it, and he still had it 4 years later. Now the other side of that year, because this is where it got hard. Del Merrick was the county code enforcement officer, 48 years old, 11 years in the job, and he had grown up 2 roads over from the Calloways and had gone to school with Grant. Isaiah's first citation came on the 11th of July, 3 weeks after the permit issued. Unpermitted structure. The pole shed, which had been standing for 8 years. He paid the fine, pulled a retroactive permit, and paid that fee too. $1,400 and 11 days of running around. He wrote all of it in the book. The second came in September. Junk vehicle, which was a 1991 flatbed he used to move lumber, parked behind the barn. He fought it because agreeing would have destroyed the case. If the segregated material was his badly stored waste, he owned it. And if he owned it, there was no $3.2 million disposal claim against anybody. The hearing was in the same room with the brown carpet. Isaiah brought volumes 1 through 20 in a milk crate and the photograph log. He testified 19 minutes about material he had not generated, had not moved, and had segregated at his own expense to prevent a release. The hearing officer reduced the citation to a warning and told him to keep the tarps in good condition. That is not a victory. That is a man getting to stay where he already was. But it put on a county record in 2023 that the regulated material on the Moss property was documented as having arrived from a third party. Del Merrick cited him 11 times in 4 years. 11 citations on the property of a man who was documenting the illegal disposal, and not 1 citation against the vehicles that were doing it. Isaiah logged every citation on a page in the back of volume 20 next to the account. That cost him something, and it should be said out loud. 4 years of it. A man in his 40s with a young daughter and a mother turning 78, cited on his own ground by a man he had known since high school, while trucks he could not stop came down the road he built. If this story is touching your heart, like the video and tell me in the comments what you would have done. Amara started first grade in August of 2023. She was 6. She had her father's steadiness and her grandmother's mouth, and she came home the second week and reported that a boy named Tanner had asked her whether she lived at the dump. Ruthie went still at the stove. Isaiah put down the plate he was drying. "What did you say?" "I said we live at the farm," Amara said. "Then he said his daddy said it's the dump." "Who's his daddy?" "I don't know. He works on trucks." Isaiah stood there a second with the dish towel in his hand. Then he crouched down to her level. "Do you know what's back there?" he asked. "Wood?" "That's right." "What kind?" Amara counted them off on her fingers the way they had done 100 times in the barn. Heart pine, white oak, cypress, the bad pile that you do not go in. "And whose is it?" "The wood's ours," she said. "The bad pile's theirs." "That's exactly right," Isaiah said. "So next time, you tell Tanner his daddy's got some of his stuff on our property, and we're keeping count." Amara thought that was very funny. She reported the next day that she had said it, and that Tanner had not had anything to say back, and she was pleased with herself for a week. Ruthie waited until the child was in bed. "You know that's going to come back around," she said. "Probably." "Isaiah." She sat down heavy in the kitchen chair. "How much longer?" He had a number by then. That was the difference between 2023 and 2008. He had an actual number, and he could not say it out loud in his own kitchen, because saying it would sound like a promise, and he had learned not to make those. "The account has to age," he said. "That's not English. It's got to be enough time that a judge sees a pattern instead of an argument," Isaiah said. 5 years. His mother looked at him across the table. 77 years old, in that same kitchen, in the house her husband had died in. "I'm not going to be here forever," Ruthie Moss said. "I know it." "I'd like to see it." Isaiah did not answer that. He got up and put the last of the dishes away, and later he went out on the porch in the dark, and the pines were making the sound they make, and back down the road there was a pole shed with 400,000 board feet under it that his mother had watched him build one post at a time. He went to the barn and got volume 20 and wrote the day down. Then, under it, he wrote 3 words that were not part of any system. The only time in 9,000 entries that he wrote something in that book that was not a fact. Mama asked again. Camille Odom did not take the case. She bought into it, which is different, and it happened by accident in a parking lot in Tifton. Isaiah met her in 2024 at a seminar on Georgia lien law that he had driven 90 minutes to attend because it cost $40, and he wanted to understand what a material man's lien was. 51. A commercial collections attorney out of Albany, 26 years chasing money for building suppliers and equipment dealers. She noticed him because he asked a question nobody in that room had a good answer to. Afterward, she found him at his truck. "You're not a contractor," she said. "No, ma'am." "What are you?" Isaiah told her. It took about 4 minutes, and she stood there in the heat with her briefcase in her hand and let him get all the way to the end of it. Then Camille Odom said the sentence that reframed 19 years. "Mr. Moss, you don't have a trespass case," she said. "You've never had a trespass case. You have a receivable. A what? A receivable. An account. Somebody has been taking a service from you and not paying for it. She put her briefcase on the hood of his truck and opened it. How long have you been sending statements? 14 months. Keep sending them, she said. Do not stop, do not change the format, and do not sue anybody yet. Then she took the case on contingency, 1/3, and she told him the schedule. 5 years of statements, 60 consecutive months, all sent, none answered, deliveries continuing. Then the demand. Why 5? Because at 18 months, a defense lawyer calls it a dispute, Camille said. At 60 months, with their own file full of your statements and their own trucks and your photographs, it is a course of dealing. A judge will not have to think about it very hard. He did not let them. He billed them every month in writing with a request to stop on every page, and they came anyway. Camille Odom's advice was not to allow the harm. It was to stop protesting a harm he could not prevent and start invoicing it. The trucks were coming regardless. He had 18 years of proof of that. What he had was the right to charge. Between 2023 and 2028, Calloway Building and Supply delivered another 2,260 loads to the Moss property. Every one logged, every month billed, every statement filed away unopened in a drawer in their office. And the business grew, because the wood kept coming and Isaiah had gotten good. Moss recovered materials did $140,000 in 24 and $260 in 26. He hired Amara's cousin Deshawn part-time, then full, then a retired millwright named Fenton who could run the resaw. An architecture firm in Charleston started specifying Moss Hart Pine by name. There is a hotel lobby in Savannah with a floor that came off 4 demolished buildings in Cadell County. The designers wrote a paragraph about provenance for the wall, and not a word of it mentions that the material arrived on a trespasser's truck. Isaiah never told them. He was not going to be a story if he could be a supplier. Ruthie Moss died in October of 2026. Her heart at home in the front room in the afternoon. Isaiah was in the barn and came up when Deshawn hollered, and he sat with his mother the 11 minutes it took an ambulance to come out that far. She was 79. The funeral was at Little Bethel, and there were 200 people at it, and Roy Dean Calloway sent flowers. That is not a kindness, and Isaiah did not take it as one. It shows you what Roy Dean Calloway was. He would send $100 of chrysanthemums to the funeral of a woman who spent the last 21 years of her life listening to his trucks unload 60 yards from her kitchen window. And he would not have understood the question if you asked it. Isaiah put the flowers on the grave with the rest. The one thing he did that week that was not about grief was on the Thursday at the kitchen table at 11 at night, after Amara was asleep. He got out volume 20 and he wrote the entry for the day. Then he turned back through the volumes to volume 6, 2011, and found the 1,100 entries in his mother's handwriting. He put a small pencil check by each one. It took 2 hours. He wanted them counted separately. Those 1,100 entries are on an exhibit list. A lawyer would hold one of those pages up in a hearing room and say the words, "The late Ruthie Moss," and a state officer would write it down. The demand went out on the 2nd of April, 2028, 60 months to the day after the first statement. Camille sent it on her letterhead by certified mail and by process server to Calloway Building and Supply, to Roy Dean Calloway, to Grant Calloway, and to Sterling Indemnity Company, the surety carrying their contractor bonds. The package was 240 pages. The invoice was the first page. Moss Recovered Materials, Invoice Number 1. For services rendered, receipt and management of construction and demolition debris, March of 2005 through March of 2028. Line 1. 20,140 tons at $48 per ton. $966,720. Line 2. Characterization, manifesting, transport, and lawful disposal of 940 tons of segregated regulated material at cost estimate from 2 licensed contractors, $3,200,000. Line 3. Interest on stated account at the statutory rate, $310,000. Total, $4,476,720. Behind the invoice were the exhibits: 20 ledgers photocopied, 2,216 photographs indexed by date, 60 statements with proof of mailing, 14 recorded deeds showing the assembly of title, the revocation letter with the signed green card, the permit and the filed fee schedule, the photograph of the sign at the road, and the transcript pages from a code hearing in 2023 where the county had already found that the regulated material came from a third party. Camille Odom put one sentence in her cover letter that Isaiah asked her to include. My client requested in writing 60 consecutive times over 5 years that your deliveries cease. Grant Calloway called the office in Albany on the 5th of April and got Camille's paralegal and used language she wrote down verbatim. He called it extortion. He said there was a license. He said the old man had been sitting out there letting it happen for 20 years and could not turn around now and bill for it. Camille Odom called him back herself and said 4 things in about 90 seconds. The license was revoked in 23, and here is your signed receipt. Your company delivered 2,260 loads after that. You received 60 statements and objected to none. And the regulated fraction is not a billing dispute. It is a reportable condition, and she was obligated to notify the state if it was not addressed in 30 days. Grant Calloway hung up on her. Then he did the thing that ended his family's company, and he did it at 6 a.m, 11 days later, and it was not a lawyer's idea. Nobody advised him to do it. He thought of it himself, driving home, the way a man thinks of something at 11 at night when he has decided the problem is a man and not a fact. He sent a dozer. Before the dozer, there were 11 days, and those 11 days were the worst of it. Calloway Building and Supply did not answer the demand with a lawyer's letter. They answered it through the county, and it arrived on the 14th of April, 2028, in a manila envelope taped to the gatepost. Notice of violation and order of abatement, Cadell County Code Enforcement. The Moss Tract was found to contain an accumulation of solid waste including regulated materials, constituting a public nuisance and a threat to groundwater. The owner of record, Isaiah N. Moss, was ordered to characterize, remove, and dispose of all of it within 30 days. Failure to comply would result in abatement by the county at the owner's expense and a lien against the property. Signed, Del Merrick. The estimate the county attached from a contractor in Albany was $280,000. He read it again in the truck, then in the kitchen a third time. It did not change. It said the state of Georgia was going to make him pay to clean up the poison another man put on his family's ground. That is the whole machinery of it in one page. 23 years of documented illegal disposal, and the first enforcement action anybody in that county had ever taken landed on the man who had documented it. Isaiah read it standing at the gate. Then he called Camille Odom at 7 that evening. She was quiet for about 4 seconds after he read it to her, which frightened him more than the letter had, because Camille Odom was not a quiet person. "Is this legal?" he asked. "It's legal in the sense that they can send it," she said. "Property owners are responsible for conditions on their land. That's the rule, and it doesn't care who put it there. So I pay $280,000 for their garbage." "You don't pay anything for 30 days, Camille said. "We appeal. And Isaiah, listen to me now. Do not touch that pile. Not one board. The day you move it, it becomes your waste and their bill goes away." Here's what $280,000 meant in the spring of 2028. He had a business worth about that on paper, in a pole shed, an inventory that took 9 months to sell. He had $11,000 in an operating account and a payroll for 3. People who have never been close to it do not understand this part. A county lien for abatement costs attaches to the property, and if it is not satisfied, the property is sold. 140 acres, bought in 1892 by a man born into slavery, reassembled by his great-great-grandson over 11 years and $91,000, could go to a tax sale over a cleanup bill for somebody else's lead paint. Grant Calloway understood that clearly. That was the point of it. Isaiah told Deshawn and Fenton on the Monday the truth. A 30-day order, an appeal, and no company in June if it went wrong. Fenton was 66 and had come out of retirement for this job. He said he would work through it either way. Deshawn was 24 and had a baby coming. Isaiah told him to go find something steady and to not feel bad about it, and Deshawn cried in the barn and took a job at a cabinet shop in Cairo the following week. That was the worst hour of the whole 23 years, and it did not involve a Calloway at all. The appeal hearing was set for the 11th of May. Camille filed it and started building the record. What she needed was the one thing not in the ledgers. Somebody from inside that company who would say out loud where the material came from. Meanwhile, Amara Moss turned 11 on the 2nd of May, and they had a cake. And 11 days later, she came home from school and asked her father a question in the kitchen doorway with her backpack still on. "Daddy, is our house the dump?" Isaiah was at the sink. He turned around. She was standing there in the doorway, 11 years old, holding the straps of her backpack with both hands, and she was not crying, and she was not being funny. "Who said that?" "Everybody's saying it. There's a paper on the gate." "There is a paper on the gate," Isaiah said. "Tanner said the county's going to take our land because of the trash. He said his daddy said." She swallowed. "Is that true?" 23 years earlier, a man in a room with brown carpet had said, "You can't dump on a dump," and 3 people had laughed, and Isaiah Moss had said thank you for the time and sat down. Now it was in his kitchen, out of an 11-year-old, on a Tuesday. He did not lie to her. He crouched down, which took his knee a second the way it does at 47, and he put himself at her level. "Some of it's true," he said. "The county sent a paper that says we have to clean up the bad pile or they'll do it and charge us." "Can we?" "It costs more money than we have." Amara looked at him. She had her grandmother's face when she was working something out. "But it's not ours," she said. You said. The bad pile's theirs. That's right. Then why is the paper for you? Isaiah Moss took his time with that one, because it was the real question, and because a man gets one chance to answer that question for a child, and he had already used his one chance on a different question years before. Because it's easier to send a paper to me, he said. Amara thought about that. Then she asked the thing that Isaiah repeated to Camille Odom on the phone that night, and that Camille repeated in a hearing room 3 weeks later, with permission, because sometimes a child says the case better than a lawyer can. Did you write down that it's theirs? Every load, for 23 years. Then show them the book, Amara said. Isaiah stood up and put his hand on the top of her head for a second. That's the plan, he said. Then he went out on the back porch and sat down in the folding chair, and Amara came out about 10 minutes later with her homework and sat on the step below him, and neither of them said anything for a while. Down the road past the pole shed, the trucks had not come in 3 days. Sterling Indemnity Company had received a copy of Camille Odom's demand package on the 3rd of April, and an underwriter in Atlanta had read all 240 pages of it, and on the 11th, she had sent a reservation of rights letter to Calloway Building and Supply and put a hold on new bond capacity pending review. A construction company that cannot get bonded cannot bid public work. By the 5th of May, Calloway Building and Supply had been unable to submit on a school addition and a county road project, and Roy Dean Calloway, who was 89 years old and had not made a decision at that company in 4 years, came into the office and asked his son what was going on. Grant Calloway told his father it was handled. He told him the county had ordered the Moss place cleaned up, that the old man would fold inside the month, and that once the pile was gone, there would be nothing to argue about. That last part is the sentence that mattered. Once the pile was gone, there would be nothing to argue about. Grant Calloway sat with that idea for about 6 days, and on the night of the 16th of May, driving home on the county road past the entrance to the cattle road with the white sign on it, he decided that the fastest way to make a pile stop existing is to put dirt on it. He called his equipment foreman at 11 that night. The lowboy came down the county road at 10 minutes before 6 in the morning on the 17th of May, 2028, with a dozer chained to the deck. Isaiah Moss was already up. He was always up at 5. He was in the barn with coffee, going over a cut list, when he heard the engine break out on the road. He came out through the barn door and stood there. The sky over the pines was the color of a nickel. The lowboy turned in at his sign, took the gap wide, put its trailer tires 11 feet into the grass, and came down the road he built. A pickup followed it. They stopped at the turnaround, 60 yards from the fenced pile. Isaiah walked down there with the coffee still in his hand. 2 men got out. The equipment foreman, a man named Purnell, and Grant Calloway, 46, in a clean shirt at 6 in the morning, come out to watch. The dozer was a D6 with a 6-way blade. Cody Pruitt had hauled it. He was up on the deck unchaining it, and he had known what the job was since 11 the night before. "Mornin'," Grant said. "Mornin'," Isaiah said. "We're going to take care of your problem for you." Isaiah looked past him at the fence and the tarps and the sign he had repainted the summer before. "Which problem is that?" "County says that pile's a nuisance." Grant put his hands in his pockets. "We grade it out, cap it, and by lunch there's no pile. No pile, no nuisance, no invoice. You can go back to your firewood." "That material's under an abatement order," Isaiah said. "It's evidence in a proceeding." "It's debris on a piece of dirt." "It's segregated, regulated material with a photograph on every load." Grant Calloway smiled at him. It was not even a mean smile. It was the smile of a man who has finally figured out the answer to a problem that has been annoying him. "Mr. Moss," he said, "in about 4 hours, it's going to be under 3 feet of fill. Then it's just ground. Then everybody can go home." Here is where a different man loses everything. A different man stands in front of a dozer. A different man goes to the barn and comes back with something. And then, this is a story about a black man in South Georgia with a weapon on his own property at 6 in the morning with 3 white men standing there. That story has one ending, and everybody knows what it is. Isaiah Moss did not move toward the fence. He set his coffee cup down on the fender of the pickup, took his phone out of his shirt pocket, and turned on the camera. "Go ahead," he said. Grant Calloway looked at the phone. "Put that up." "No, sir," Isaiah said. "You're on my property. You've told me what you intend to do, and I'm recording it. You can leave any time you want." He held the phone up. He got the lowboy, the tag number, the dozer coming down the ramps, Purnell standing there, and Grant Calloway in a clean shirt. He narrated it flat. Date, time, location, the names of the 3 men present, and what had just been said to him. Then he said one more thing to the camera. "This material is subject to a county abatement order dated the 14th of April and is documented in a demand under review by Sterling Indemnity Company." Grant Calloway told Cody Pruitt to get on the dozer. Cody Pruitt was 51. 19 years driving for Calloway Building and Supply, a wife at the hospital, 2 grown kids, 11 years to go before retirement, and a chain binder in his hand. He had also, in 2009, leaned out a truck window and said, "You know this ain't right." "Cody," Grant said, "let's go." Cody Pruitt looked at the fenced pile with the tarps on it. He looked at Isaiah Moss standing there with a phone up. Then he looked at Grant Calloway. "No," he said. The whole yard went quiet except for the lowboy idling. "What?" "I ain't burying that." Cody came down off the deck. "I hauled painted trim out here off half the teardowns in this county. I hauled board I didn't like the feel of. I know what's under them tarps because I put it there." "You'll do the job you're paid for." "Not that one," Cody Pruitt said. Grant Calloway fired him standing in the yard, in front of 2 witnesses and a camera that was still running. Cody handed over the keys and asked how he was supposed to get home. Grant told him to walk. Then Purnell, who had said nothing the whole time, said he would run him back to town. That is how it ended, the 2 of them driving out and leaving the dozer on the ramps. Grant Calloway stood in the yard for a second. Then he got in the pickup and left too. And the dozer sat there for 11 days until a rental company came and got it. Isaiah watched them go up the road. Then he stopped the recording and stood in his own turnaround with the sun coming up over the pines, and his hands were shaking. He told 2 people about that, ever. He went in the house and sat down and did not go to the barn for an hour. Then he emailed the video to Albany. Camille called him back before she had watched all of it. "Isaiah," she said, "say nothing to anybody. Do not post that. Do not show it to a neighbor. Do you understand me?" "I understand." "They just handed you the case. Here is why. The billing dispute was a civil matter between 2 parties, arguable, defensible, the kind of thing lawyers grind on for 2 years. An attempt to bury regulated material is not a billing dispute. It is a separate act. It comes after the demand, and it is the most damaging fact you can put in front of a regulator or an insurer. It is consciousness of guilt, on video, with the owner standing in the frame explaining his plan. Camille Odom did 4 things that day. She filed an emergency motion to stay the abatement order pending appeal, with the video attached. She sent a copy to Sterling Indemnity. She notified the State Environmental Protection Division of an attempted unauthorized closure of a documented regulated accumulation. And she called Cody Pruitt at 4 in the afternoon. He had gotten a ride home at 7 that morning with no job after 19 years. He listened to Camille explain who she was, and then he asked one question. "Is Moss all right?" "He's fine." "All right," Cody Pruitt said. "What do you need from me?" He gave a sworn statement on the 22nd of May, 11 pages, 19 years of loads, what was in them, who dispatched him, and the instruction he got at 11 at night on the 16th. The state inspector came out on the 24th. His name was Hoyt Ammons, not the grader, his nephew, also Hoyt, which happens in South Georgia. Isaiah did not know they were related until the man was walking the fence line and mentioned his uncle taught lumber grading. The inspection took 6 hours. At the end of it, he stood at the fence with his clipboard and looked at the tarped stacks, sorted by year, tagged by load date, with a photograph log and a milk crate on the tailgate of a truck. "Mr. Moss," he said, "how long have you been keeping this?" 23 years. Hoyt Ammons looked at the milk crate. "I've been doing this 19 years, he said. "I've never seen a private party do this. Not one time." The state issued its findings on the 8th of June. The regulated material on the Moss tract was determined to have originated with a third party. The owner had segregated, contained, and documented it in a manner that prevented release. Responsibility for characterization and disposal was assigned to the generator, Calloway Building and Supply. The county abatement order against Isaiah Moss was withdrawn on the 12th of June, 2028. Del Merrick did not sign that one. Somebody above him did. Sterling Indemnity Company pulled the bonds on the 19th of June. That is the sentence that ended Calloway Building and Supply, and no judge wrote it. A surety does not have to keep writing bonds for a contractor under a state environmental finding and a $4.5 million claim. The underwriter in Atlanta ran the numbers and ended the relationship in 2 pages. Without bonding, Calloway could not bid public work. Public work was 60% of their book. The hearing was on the 11th of September, 2028, in an administrative proceeding on the state's cost recovery action, consolidated with Isaiah's civil claim by agreement of the parties. It was not a jury trial. There was never a jury trial in this story. It was a hearing officer named Pruitt, no relation to Cody, in a state building in Albany with fluorescent lights and a long table. 2 days. The second afternoon is the part people tell. Camille Odom put the ledgers in first. 20 composition books, exhibits 1 through 20, carried in the same milk crate Isaiah had used for 6 years. She walked the hearing officer through the system. 7 data points an entry, 9,412 entries, 4 fixed photograph positions. She held up a page from Volume 9. "This entry is in the handwriting of the late Ruthie Moss," she said, "Mr. Moss's mother. She recorded approximately 1,100 of these from the back porch of the house where she died. She was 79 years old." Camille put Cody Pruitt on. He testified 50 minutes, about 19 years of loads. He named the teardowns, the painted trim off the Whitmore Street house, the board he did not like the feel of, the sealed buckets out of a warehouse job in 2019. He said he told dispatch twice over the years that he did not think the Moss place was a legal disposal site, and was told to run the route. Then Camille asked him about the morning of the 17th of May. "What were you instructed to do?" "Grade the pile out and cap it with fill." "Who instructed you?" Grant Calloway, through Mr. Purnell and then Mr. Calloway directly, in the yard. What did you do? I told him no, Cody Pruitt said. And then I got fired standing there. Camille Odom played the video. 11 minutes of a phone camera held steady in the gray light before sunrise. A low boy, a dozer coming down the ramps. A man in a clean shirt saying in about 4 hours it is going to be under 3 feet of fill. Then she read Grant Calloway's own sentence into the record from a page in Volume 16 dated August of 2021, recorded in the yard by a man wiping his hands on a shop cloth. Nobody is ever going to read your little book. That is Exhibit 16, page 104, Camille said. It has been read into the record of a state proceeding. Isaiah Moss testified 2 hours and 11 minutes. He did not raise his voice once. Calloway's attorney worked the ground everybody knew he would work, the 5 years of statements, and he asked it 3 different ways. Why did you let it continue? Why did you not seek an injunction? Isn't it true that you allowed the deliveries because the account was becoming valuable? I sent them 60 letters asking them to stop, Isaiah said. Every one of those letters is in their filing cabinet. They never answered one. I had no power to stop a truck on a county road. I had the power to write down what was on it. But you profited. I got paid for a service I did not ask to perform, Isaiah said. I'd rather have the land back the way my daddy had it. The last question in the whole hearing came from the hearing officer, and it was not on anybody's outline. Mr. Moss, 23 years. Why didn't you ever just call the sheriff? Isaiah sat with that a second. I did. In 2006, he said. Deputy came out and said it was a civil matter. He was right. It was a civil matter for 23 years. He put his hands flat on the table. What I could do was be right on paper. So that's what I did. The findings issued on the 4th of October, 2028. The hearing officer found that the license of 2005 was validly revoked in April of 2023, that all deliveries after that date were unauthorized, that the 60 monthly statements, unanswered, with deliveries continuing, established an account stated at the filed rate, that the attempted grading of irregulated accumulation on the 17th of May was an attempt to conceal a documented condition. Judgment for the claimant on the account, $966,720 plus interest. Responsibility for characterization and disposal of the regulated fraction assigned to the generator, with the state's cost recovery running against Calloway Building and Supply and Grant Calloway individually. The final settlement, executed in January of 2029, was $4,100,000. Calloway Building and Supply did not have $4,100,000. What happened is what happens. Sterling Indemnity paid a portion under bonds it had already written. The company sold its yard on the highway, its equipment, the lot on Mill Street. It filed for reorganization in March, converted in July, and Calloway Building and Supply, in business since 1961, closed that fall. Grant Calloway settled the individual claim against him for an amount that was not disclosed and moved to Alabama. Roy Dean Calloway was 90 years old when the company closed. He came out to the Moss place in November of 2029. He drove himself, which he should not have been doing, and came down the cattle road at 2 in the afternoon and stopped at the turnaround. He got out slow, holding the door, thin in the way very old men get. He stood in the yard and looked at the pole shed with 400,000 board feet under it. "That out of my trucks?" he said. "Most of it." Roy Dean Calloway looked at the stacks a while. Then he said what he had come to say, and he said it badly. And Isaiah gave him credit later for coming at all. "I said a thing to you at a county meeting one time." "You did?" "I've thought about it." His hand was on the car door. "I was raised that a man's land is his land. I don't know why I didn't count yours." He stopped. "That's not an excuse. I don't have one. I'm sorry, son." Isaiah Moss stood there in the yard with a shop cloth in his hand. He did not tell the old man about a room with brown carpet and 3 people laughing. He did not mention his mother writing 1,100 entries in cursive from a back porch, or his daughter asking whether their house was the dump, or a young man crying in the barn over a job. He did not shake his hand this time. He gave him a small nod, one movement, down and up. Then he said the only thing he said. "You should get off the road before dark, Mr. Calloway." Roy Dean Calloway nodded back, got in the car, and drove out. He died 14 months later. 400 people came to the funeral, and the county named a stretch of road after him. Both true, and neither changes the ledger. He called Deshaun at the cabinet shop in Cairo and offered him the yard foreman job, and Deshaun took it, and he is still there. Then Isaiah Moss did the thing that tells you who he was the whole time. He bought the Calloway yard on the highway at the bankruptcy sale. 2.1 acres, a metal building, a paved lot, and a truck scale. He paid $410,000, which was market. He did not gloat. When the newspaper asked about the symbolism, he said it had a scale on it, and he needed a scale. There is a sign on the highway now, and on the wall inside the front office, framed, is a single-page photocopied out of Volume 1, in pencil, in a dead man's small square handwriting, from 1994. The back 40 took 2 years to clean. Not by Isaiah. The state's contractor did the regulated fraction in the fall of 2029. 9 days, 11 trucks, and everyone left with a manifest. Isaiah Moss stood at the fence and watched the first load go out. 24 years of tarps and sorting and repainting a hand-lettered sign, gone in 9 days, because somebody finally had to pay for it. He wrote the entry that night. Regulated fraction removed under state manifest, 940 tons. Then he drew a line under it, which he had never done in 9,000 entries. The salvage operation is the business now. Moss Recovered Materials employs 11 people. There is heart pine out of Cadell County in a hotel lobby in Savannah, a distillery in Asheville, and the reading room of a library in Charleston. Fenton retired a second time in 32 and comes in Tuesdays, the way millwrights do. The house is still the house. Isaiah rebuilt the back porch in 2030 out of white oak that came off a courthouse annex on somebody else's truck in 2019. He did it in the evenings, the way his father would have. Amara Moss is 14 now. She is tall, quiet the way her father is quiet, and she has opinions about wood she will share whether you asked or not. She can grade a board. She is not certified and says she is going to be. She started her own book at 9, counting trucks from the folding chair on the porch. Nobody told her to. She had watched her father and her grandmother do it her whole life, and in 2026, after Ruthie died, she asked at the kitchen table whether she could have a composition book of her own. He bought her one at the drugstore for $2.49, which is what they cost now. Date, time, truck number, and a column of her own that she added because she was 9 and it seemed important, which was a check mark if the driver waved. Cody Pruitt waved every time. Her book is on the shelf in the barn, after volume 20, smaller than the others, purple because that is what the drugstore had. There is a photograph on the wall in the front office at the highway yard. 3 books, side by side, open. 1994, in pencil, small and square and slanted right. 2011, in a 70-year-old woman's cursive. 2026, in the enormous, careful printing of a 9-year-old. 3 generations of the same handwriting habit. Isaiah gave one interview and turned down the rest. The story got out in 2029. The Atlanta paper found it through the state findings and ran it in February, and then it was everywhere for about 11 days. 4 documentary crews, a producer from California who wanted to option it, a man who wanted him to speak at conferences for money. He said no to all of it. He gave the one interview because Camille said the record ought to be public. The one thing he asked the reporter to include was not about him. He asked her to explain heir property, to put in the paragraph about how a family loses 140 acres because somebody died in 1951 without a will, and how there are counties in Georgia and Alabama and the Carolinas where it is happening right now. She put it in. It ran on the 4th paragraph. Wanda Pettigrew retired in 2024 and did not live to see the settlement. She died in the spring of 2028, 4 months before the hearing. At the reception, a woman he did not know said she was Wanda's daughter. Her mother had talked about the Moss deeds for years, and when the last one recorded in 23, she came home and told the family at supper. Cody Pruitt runs a route for a paving contractor in Thomas County. He would not take money, and Isaiah stopped offering after the 3rd time. What he took was a truckload of heart pine flooring in 30 for a house he was fixing up. It was wood and not a check, and men will do that. Del Merrick left code enforcement in 2029 and sells insurance now. He and Isaiah see each other at the grocery store twice a year. Neither has ever said anything about it. There are things that do not get repaired in a county that size, and both men know which ones. The last thing is a Saturday this spring. Isaiah Moss is 48. He is in the barn with a board on 2 sawhorses, Amara across from him with a straight edge, and between them, a piece of longleaf that came out of the pile in 2014 and has been drying under the pole shed ever since. "How many rings?" he says. She counts. She takes her time because he taught her that a fast count is a wrong count. 38 to the inch. So how old was the tree? Amara works it out, moving the straight edge, the way he did at her age with his father standing where he is standing. "Older than the house," she says. "Older than the county," Isaiah says. She runs her thumb across the end grain. Out the barn door, the light is going orange over the pines. Back down the cattle road is the turnaround where a dozer sat on its ramps for 11 days, and past that, 400 yards on, a white sign on 2 heart pine posts. "Daddy," Amara says, "do you ever wish you'd yelled at them?" Isaiah Moss thinks about that. He thinks about a room with brown carpet. $100 a month. 11 citations. A young man crying in this barn about a job, and his mother at the kitchen table asking how much longer. "No," he says, "yelling is free." He picks up the board and turns it over so she can see the other face. "You have to make it cost something." I hope you enjoyed that story. Like the video and subscribe so you do not miss the next one. They cut it that evening. It went into a stair tread in a house in Charleston, and it will be there in 100 years and nobody who walks on it will ever know where it came from. The book is on the shelf in the barn, 21 volumes now. Somebody is still writing in the last one.
They mistook Isaiah's silence for weakness, when in reality he was building a case, one truckload at a time. He did not waste his strength on shouting. He turned every insult, every ignored warning, and every piece of dumped material into evidence. What makes his victory so satisfying is that the company ultimately financed the very land, business, and legal strategy that defeated them. Isaiah's story is a powerful reminder that patience becomes dangerous when it is disciplined, documented, and backed by purpose. Never underestimate a man who keeps records while everyone else keeps laughing.